Hello. Okay, I think we'll get started. Okay, so hi, my name is Daniele. I'm on the GSC Council, and I'm really excited to be here. This is the Goldwater Scholar Community NSF-GRFP Fellowships webinar, and we have some really exciting speakers and panelists today. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion about the NSF-GRFP from both sides. So from here, I'll pass it on to Zaheen, who will introduce the speakers.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Zaheen and I'm part of the GSC Community Council, and I'm super excited to have all our speakers here introduce themselves, starting with Morgan.
Hi guys, my name is Morgan Gibbs, and I'm currently a third year at UNC Chapel Hill getting my PhD in chemistry. I went to the University of Georgia for my undergraduate degree, also in chemistry, and won the Goldwater in 2017. And then I moved on to UNC, and actually before I was there, sorry, my bad, I won the NSF-GRFP in my senior year of undergrad. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay, awesome. Tali?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tali. Right now, I'm a second-year grad student at the University of Chicago, studying physics. I did my undergrad at the University of Michigan, where I was a physics and math major. And my research in my undergrad was actually sort of about, it was more astronomy focused, so it's about solar system dynamics. And I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to, what exactly I wanted to do in grad school. So I actually ended up applying to programs in planetary science, physics, and applied math. And I bring that up because that sort of, I then had to think about what topic I wanted to write my NSF-GRFP on. So I applied for it in the senior year of my undergrad. The NSF is flexible in that you don't actually, if you apply in your undergrad, you don't have to pursue the topic of your proposal, but it's not flexible in that if you apply to a certain major field of study, you can use your the NSF to use in a different department. So I just had to, that's something I had to think about when I was applying. So I ended up writing my proposal on my undergrad research and then switched fields for grad school. Yeah, and now I'm at Chicago, and the NSF has been really wonderful because aside from being additional funding, it gives me flexibility in that I'm not actually tied down to any particular advisor, so I can move between groups a little bit more than another grad student may.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Tali, for introducing yourselves. Mark?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark. I'm currently a first year at Columbia University studying neurobiology and behavior. So I got my Goldwater in 2019 as a junior, and then applied for the NSF-GRFP in the life sciences, neurosciences category, and got it this past cycle, 2020. So really excited to be able to share some insight with y'all. Just a brief bit of advice for me, like really enjoy the application process. It's a time for you to reflect on yourself or what great things you've done. It's a great opportunity to practice your writing, which is really tough in science, but it's really great to get any sort of practice whatsoever. And also just to explore what you're passionate about, what ideas you would like to share with the NSF and with the greater scientific community in the years to come.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And Julia?
Hi, I'm Julia. I did my undergrad at University of Pittsburgh, where I worked on the synthesis of bioactive compounds, so organic synthesis. And then I was a 2019 Goldwater Scholar, and then applied my senior year for NSF, and luckily got it. So now I am a first year at UChicago, working still in organic chemistry, but more on methodology now.
Okay, thank you, Julia. And finally, Giselle.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me be part of this group. I'm not a Goldwater scholar, nor was I an NSF fellow, but I managed the program for 10 years. So from the other side, organizing all the reviewers, making the final decisions on who received the fellowships, and answering millions of questions. So I'm here as a resource to help you, and I'm really excited to participate. And as I tell everybody, if you don't apply, you have zero chance of getting it. So that's my first piece of advice. And the other one is, if you're an undergraduate, this is really taking you pretty far along the road towards applying to graduate school, because you're forced to write the kinds of things that you do put into a graduate application. So it's very, very beneficial to do this as an undergraduate. And then of course, you also have an opportunity later as a grad student to apply if you didn't get it. Whereas if you're a grad student, you only get the one opportunity. So I'm here to answer questions. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. I want to say, once again, thank you to all our wonderful speakers for introducing themselves and providing awesome advice for those of you watching. I also want to thank the people who've submitted questions beforehand on our Google form. And so if you have any questions you have for our speakers, feel free to say so in the chat, but also do try and ensure that your questions are general enough so that everyone watching can get something out of it. So now, starting off with our first question, we kind of talk about timing. Some of us are seniors, some of us are grad students, and then so on and so forth. And so, maybe tell us, what are your thoughts on applying to the NSF-GRFP, and maybe when did you start working on your application, whether it be as an undergrad, a grad student, and so on and so forth.
Sure, I'll speak up. So personally, I think if you're an undergrad, you don't have anything to lose here by applying, really, because if you're in graduate school, you can only apply once, but you can apply in undergrad and in graduate school. So even if you don't get it, I think it's worth your time to put in the time, apply for it. And even if you don't get it, you have practice for round 2 when you apply when you're in graduate school. As far as timing on starting the application, I would say now. If you haven't already started, I would start, because it's a lot more than I think I thought it would be when I applied. And it's really helpful to have time to get feedback from your mentor and other people who could read your application. So that's my 2 cents on, I think you should definitely apply in undergrad if you can.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that, really awesome response, Morgan. And so, of course, how did maybe talk about, how did applying for the Goldwater scholarship really help you? And maybe, what do you think worked for when you wrote that application, and what skills translated from that into applying for the NSF-GRFP? And maybe some quick tips on that.
Sure. I mean, they're similar in a lot of ways. You have to write about your research for both. You have a personal statement for both. I think the Goldwater is such a rigorous process that you kind of get used to going through the ringer with everybody reading your applications. And, even with Goldwater, you have to go through sort of the 2 rounds, your school and then the national round. So that's even more rigorous in some ways. You have to pass these 2 barriers. So I think if you're a Goldwater scholar, you already have way more practice doing this than the average person. So you're probably well prepared to do this if you just stay on top of your stuff.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo that. I think there's really no reason you should not apply as an undergrad if you have the Goldwater, because it just means that you have the research background to be able to, speak to current research in your field and suggest what to do in the future, which is really what the research proposal is all about. So yeah, highly recommend applying as an undergrad.
Okay, thank you, Tali and Morgan, for really telling us about how the Goldwater, how applying for the Goldwater really prepares you for the NSF-GRFP. And as many of us know, the Goldwater, one of the more interesting statements you have to write is the personal statement. And so maybe, what are your experiences writing the personal statement and your advice for the different sections? And, what do you think reviewers are looking for, when they read your personal statement?
So I guess I think one of the things that's maybe misunderstood often for the application is that the intellectual merit and broader impact categories seem to be weighed like equally, So I guess Giselle would probably know more about this, but I would recommend making sure that your broader impact is extremely important for the NSF application. And so I would recommend having a category for intellectual merit and a category for broader impact in both of your statements. And so for me, my personal statement was it was equally spaced. I had 50% of the space was intellectual merit, and then 50% was broader impact. So I would recommend maybe structuring your statement similarly.
Yeah, mine was similar where they were pretty evenly spaced, and I made sure to really just include every experience that I could possibly spin into something science. So even things like working as a balloon artist at parties, I was just like, oh, it was a great opportunity to work on my communication skills and running a business, which will help me as a PI to manage funds. So things that are really loosely related to science, you can really spin to your advantage and just make yourself seem as experienced as you can. And then at the end of each section, I took around 8 or 9 lines just to summarize the section. They're reading a lot of different people's personal statements. That summarizing it for them at the end just helps them help you.
And one thing that I would add to something that I added in my application was a little bit of an opener, some sort of narrative to connect all of the bits and pieces that may come from the intellectual merit activities that you have and the broader impacts activities that you may have. And so just maybe a quick paragraph, nothing that takes up too much space. You have 3 pages to work with, but just a quick paragraph of something to give them to give the reviewers an overview of what you would like to talk about, and maybe some of the reasons that you are applying for the NSF-GRFP in the first place, some of the reasons that you are going into science for. Those are some really nice things to grab the reviewer's attention, and also to give them sort of the why behind you doing all of the stuff that you describe in your intellectual merits and broader impact sections.
I guess I can jump in here. You really want the reviewers to know who you are, to tell your story. And what Tali said about making sure you address intellectual merit and broader impacts in both statements is really, really important. The only thing that I would add is that it isn't really 50-50 intellectual merit and broader impacts. So some people really don't, it's not balanced. So in terms of the reviewers who are looking at what you put together in a holistic way, they're saying, given everything in the application, how strong is an applicant in intellectual merit and in broader impacts. But NSF was very careful to say that both must be given full consideration, but neither on its own is sufficient. So it allows for some latitude in terms of your backgrounds and interests. You don't have to feel you have to do both equally. So, but definitely address both. It's really important to address both.
Okay, thank you, Giselle, and for all of you to really talking about how do you blend together all the different aspects of your personal statement. And so now kind of, transitioning to this next section of the GRFP application, specifically the research proposal. And so maybe what are all your recommendations on the research proposal, especially like how do you balance, the technicality of your research and, making sure your reviewers actually understand what you're talking about?
So advice that I got was ignore what they say about not making it technical, because everyone who wins usually has a pretty technical proposal. So don't be afraid to make it technical. I would just make sure that they're things that are commonly known, at least in your subfield, and they'll catch up as long as it's understandable. If a general person could read it and get like the gist of what you're trying to do, that's enough.
As far as I understand, your reviewers are generally from your major field of study. So I would just pitch it. So if you're applying for physics, I would pitch it to your general physics professor. So maybe your think like colloquium talk technical level. So maybe you can use terminology that's commonly known in your field of study, but like very specific terms you define and maybe don't introduce very many of them over the course of your research proposal. And then my other piece of advice is that it's supposed to be like a proposal for your graduate work. So that means it has to be like big. It's supposed to be a big project that you are proposing to undertake, not something that you could do in the next few months, but something you could do in the next few years.
I could speak a little bit to writing a proposal that sort of fell at the boundaries of a couple of fields. So I was really trying to craft a project at the intersection of neuroscience and immunology. I ended up submitting a proposal or submitting my application for the neurosciences category in the life sciences. But when it comes to comprehension for your reviewer, since I knew that I was applying for neurosciences, I knew that I would have to maybe include a little bit more background information in terms of the immunology side of things that I was bringing into my particular project. And so think about your reviewer first and foremost about where they're possibly coming from. And if you think that you have a lot of mutual background in terms of the project that you're proposing, you can maybe like save some space by not having to define everything, like what is a neuron, or what is a synapse, or what is an action potential, those types of things. But if you're trying to bring in maybe a technique that is not necessarily as widely used yet, or a concept from a different field that you may think requires a little bit more explaining for your project, feel free to bring that in and add a little bit more of that comprehension to your proposal.
Okay, thank you all for responding. Talia and Mark really brought up this idea of thinking about what are you going to do in grad school and all of that. And one of the biggest questions when it comes to writing this research proposal is what do you like? Do you decide to focus on something that's like it's an extension of your undergrad research, or maybe do you talk about the research you're going to propose as a grad student? And so, could you guys maybe talk about how did you approach writing that in your research proposal?
Yeah, I can comment on that. For me, I applied as an undergrad, and so yeah, that dilemma is definitely there. But I decided to do a proposal related to my undergrad research because I already knew so much about that it was going to be much easier for me to write a comprehensive, cohesive proposal on something that I already knew a lot about than to totally propose something new, especially as an undergrad when you haven't branched out necessarily as much as maybe you have in grad school to other fields. And you don't have to you're not required to undertake this project. And so realistically, you can write about whatever you want, but that's my advice is write about something you know and something you feel confident in so that you can really show that through your proposal.
Yeah, I agree with Morgan. And I think it also, if you write about your undergrad research, it might give you the opportunity to refer to some of the work you did as an undergrad to sort of emphasize your previous experience in the field. I think that just one thing to consider again is what field you want to do your grad program in, and make sure that your proposal does fall into that major field of study so that you can use the GRFP if you get it for your grad school.
So I did not write my proposal based on my undergrad. I actually reached out to a couple of professors at grad schools I was applying to. And they were actually all very welcoming about it. But the one that I decided to end up to work with on it was just really helpful. And he pitched me a couple ideas, and then I kind of picked one and ran with it. And it was definitely a lot of work learning a new area since I was shifting into methods. But it was a great learning experience. And in the end, I think it helped me network a lot for grad school applications. And I'm actually rotating for that professor right now. So it was a good way to gauge like what I need in a mentor as a grad student, the things that I like, the things that I don't like. So it was really helpful with the grad school process as well.
Okay, thank you all, or Giselle.
I just wanted to say, you know, the biggest thing is feel, you know, convey excitement and enthusiasm in what you propose to do. You don't have to do it, but that sort of what the reviewers are looking for is, how do you think about science? And can you think about it in a way that shows that you're going to be a leader in scientific research? So that's really what they're looking for, is your ability to do science. And it's communicated through the project that you propose, but you also want to show enthusiasm for that project should you end up deciding to do it. So I just wanted to say that, you know, NSF encourages the reviewers to look at the whole package, and what you're really looking for is someone who's going to be a leader and someone who's happy and enthusiastic about the science that they want to do, whether or not they do that actual project. So it's really important. And I would definitely share all of those materials with your reference writers so they can address your potential. So there's one other little thing I wanted to say on the field of study. Some fields of study are mixed bags of different types of people. So engineering, forget it. There's 2 mechanical engineering panels, you know, but some of the social sciences are mixed with anthropology, linguistics, and different areas. And so you can actually look on the NSF-GRFP.org site and see what fields of study are in each panel. And so I would do that because maybe it isn't just neuroscience, maybe it's neuroscience and molecular, and therefore you need to be able to speak to a molecular biologist as well. So check out the fields of study. The panel composition is a good extra piece of information to know about as you get ready.
Okay, thank you, Giselle, for really telling us some of the inner workings, you know, how are, you know, our students' applications going to be read and all that. And, you know, also, you know, one question that's come up in terms of like, how do you write this? Because, you know, in science, some of us are like, you know, methods people, some are more experimental people. Sometimes we just have all these awesome ideas and they want to write about all of them. And so should we really focus our research statement, like, you know, one specific hypothesis? Or, you know, should you do a bunch of processes you want to answer your PhD on? And so what are your thoughts on this?
For my first thought when I heard you say that is you only have 3 pages to talk about this. So if you have a bunch of things you want to talk about, the overall idea of like what you're proposing might get lost if you get too deep into the weeds of like those different things. For me, I had one hypothesis and I said, here are the 3 ways I'm going to address that essentially, but keeping it focused on bringing it back to that one main point of, you know, this is the overall goal of the project. And I'm interested to hear what others say because that's just the way I structured mine. That's also the way I saw a lot of other proposals when I was reading other people's proposals. I saw them structured similarly. But yeah, that would be what I say.
Okay, Tali?
Oh no, I did something similar. So I had sort of an overarching goal, which I split into 2 phases. And then in each of the phases, I proposed maybe using a variety of techniques to answer relevant questions. So, you know, you can have substructure in your proposal, but I think that there really should be one main big idea that you're trying to address.
And I would also mention that it really helps to look at the application materials of previous winners, because a lot of the nuances that come with formatting the research statement can be quickly just like evaluated when you look at the statements of people that have gone through this process before. So just to throw this out there, if any of you message any of us after, I know that speaking for myself, I'm willing to share my application materials so that we can discuss them and see what types of format or structure could be best applicable to your research statement or personal statement. With regards to the research statement in particular, I do agree with Tali and Morgan that having a more specific hypothesis will allow you to go into a little bit more of the concrete details of what you would actually do to address that hypothesis. And so having a hypothesis and then maybe having a couple of specific aims are helpful to show to the reviewer that you're not just looking at a hypothesis and then blindly shooting in the dark to answer that hypothesis, but that you actually have some steps forward in that direction that could prove useful and are informed.
Yeah, going off of what Mark said about structuring your essay, so I didn't really have any examples I was able to find that were specifically in organic synthesis. So if you're in a similar situation and you can't find those examples that are really close to you, I would just recommend reading as many journal articles as you can in your field and trying to sort of not copy what they're doing, but copy the format of what they're doing and try to make yours look like it was published in a journal or something like that.
Yeah, just a sort of overarching thought is, remember your application is one of 20 to 30 that person is reading. So you want it to be, you guys all gave fantastic pointers, very clear hypothesis, very clear sections coming back to your central goals. That's exactly what you want to do to get your message across, because literally reading application after application, you want to write really well and have your words stand out and your science stand out.
Hey, thank you all for really offering your awesome insight, and how do you approach, writing your personal research statement and all of that. And, since all of us are involved in sciences has some, physical sciences, life sciences, chemistry, biology, all of that. And so one really important question is like, if you work in a life science or something similar to that, how do you tread that line between quote unquote eligible and ineligible research directed for medical use and all of that?
I don't think, are you a life science? You're in life science, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I applied under structural biology, which is under the life sciences. I treaded this line. I had an issue with this, where I was initially, the goal of the project was, therapeutically relevant. And I just steered as far away from that as I could. I really think that that's an easy way for them to just throw your application out. I mean, Giselle can maybe talk more to that than I can, but that everybody I ever talked to, that's what they told me, and that's what I did. And I did not mention anything about, you can mention, if it's relevant to human health, but I think your end goal needs to be not to create a drug, not to create a therapeutic. It needs to be something basic. So yeah, treading the line is really difficult. I would just say as far away from that line as you can get is where you should try to be while still making it relevant.
So you can the overall human health goals are your broader impacts. So you could relate those to your broader impacts, that eventually these methodologies or this technique will help humans in some way. But you're absolutely right. You have to study a fundamental science process, and that's really critical. And so you might ask why? Well, it's because we have the NIH. So basically, you need to NSF funds only fundamental scientific research. The only field that's actually specifically mentions biomedical is biomedical engineering. So biomedical engineering allows research areas in the area of helping people with disabilities or helping with methods to help people with various medical issues. So read that very carefully, but the bottom line is no disease-related goals.
Yeah, so sorry to go off of that. Mine was far enough away from that in my broader impacts, I definitely went into the methods being developed, being used to expand medicinal chemistry and eventually lead to better therapeutics. But so I think if you're far enough away from it, it is a really good way to tie in broader impacts. But yeah, if you're closer, that's a harder line to walk.
Okay, so, thank you all for your insightful answers. How do we kind of skirt that line between, medical stuff and basic science? Now I'm going to kind of go in the opposite direction. What if you're doing something that's like really theoretical? It's like theoretical physics. How do you kind of translate that to, let's say, broader impacts and so on and so forth?
So I had trouble coming up with broader impact of my science. So I was studying solar system dynamics, and in particular looking at a mechanism in how orbits change with time. And so what I did is I had a section, like a paragraph at the end of my research proposal that I titled Significance and Broader Impact. And here first I talked about the reason why this research would be important to the field of astronomy in general. So I tried to zoom out to why my particular tiny project would be relevant to other people in the field, and then tied how putting all of those things together in the field would maybe give us a broader impact in a societal setting. So I think you do have to be a little bit creative in the way that you think about it, but generally you should be able to, this is something you can ask your research advisors, because they have to write the broader impacts of their research all the time, and so they can help you think about how to position your research in a way that fits the category.
Okay, thank you, Tali, once again for really helping some of us, soft matter physicists and all of us out there. And so now, after talking about the research thing, we're going to kind of talk about the general application process and all of that. And so, as we all know, life is a thing, and sometimes things happen in life, whether that be to ourselves, to our research, PIs, and all that sort of stuff. And so maybe, how do you discuss any extenuating circumstances you could have, run into, whether that be in your own research or anything like that? And for those of you who maybe applied as an undergrad, is there any competition with the graduate applicants, and what is that like?
So first, I don't believe there is competition with the graduate applicants. I think they sort you into categories, and you're only when you're applying as an undergrad, you're only compared against other undergrads. Is that right, Giselle? Oh,
I think you're muted.
Sorry. So for the most part, NSF tells the reviewers to compare between each level. So level ones are the undergraduates. So they are compared to each other, and then you move to the level 2s, 3s, and 4s. In the final analysis, though, everyone's kind of compared against each other, but it's just that your comparison group are your peers. And so if you're a second year graduate student, there's going to be much higher expectations for what you've already done in your research, and there's going to be broad latitude as an undergraduate. So, so I don't know if that helps, but yes, you're compared to your peers. In the final analysis, the top people will rise to the top, and it's not so many in each level, it's the top people.
I guess regarding the extenuating circumstances, I would just recommend spending more time to talk about how you were able to move forward and succeed, and maybe what you learned from the experience. For example, maybe if you had, one of your research experiences didn't go well, maybe rather than dwelling on how it didn't go well, you talk about what you learned from the experience and how it made you stronger or informed the decisions you make in the future. Something like that.
One piece of advice that I got was don't mention it yourself and instead ask your reviewers to mention it for you, because coming from them, it might seem like maybe you really struggled with a class and that person's writing one of your letters and they say they really struggled at first, but by the end of the class, they were one of the top students or something like that. But if it's in your review letters, then it doesn't take away from your accomplishments when you're talking about them yourself.
Yeah, sometimes people ask, well, I had to drop out of school for 2 years due to financial. Do I mention that in my application? Or how do I explain a gap? And you don't have to, you don't have to, but if that gap period, as Tali said, actually help develop some trait of yours, strength, leadership, or resilience, or some other trait that will certainly serve you well in science, that can easily be brought in there. I wouldn't dwell too heavily on it, but sometimes it adds a richer context to understanding who you are in the application.
And of course, as we all know, given extenuating circumstances, 2020 has been a crazy year, and so how would you let you deal with the setbacks caused by COVID, whether that be like canceled REUs, being unable to do in-person research and all of that?
I mean, I don't think I have any great advice aside from, I think many of us are in the same boat. So I think you do really want to focus on what you were able to do in spite of the circumstances rather than just talking about how, like you weren't able, because everyone sort of has problems doing research nowadays.
Yeah, no, one of the things you can do is talk about what you would have done if you could have, it's a few years ago, there was a previous research statement and we removed that because we said how that disadvantages people who may not have had a lot of research experience. So there's a lot of latitude about what you can write about. And so, what you did during the COVID pandemic may be relevant or not, but if it is, then that shows, some aspect of your ability to do science, and that's helpful to add. But as you all said, you're all in the same boat. So everyone's disadvantaged to the same way for the most part.
Yeah, definitely, given all that's happened, so don't be worried about that. And so, of course, the NSF-GRFP looks for a lot of things. And so what are all your thoughts on listing non-research activities, and how can you maybe demonstrate, being a leader in research and all of that? when you go through the application process?
I think one way is if you have something that could be a broader impact, for sure, you should put that in your personal statement. Like, for example, I had worked at like an elementary school and went there every week and did science experiments with those kids and to try and, sort of foster interest in science and get into the low income community that I was working in and all of that. And so I think something like that, for sure, you should just spin it as a broader impact thing because it is, and use it in that way. I think, you should definitely focus on things that might be more relevant. Like if you have some way out of the park like activity that isn't even relevant at all, then maybe you could use that space to talk about something that is a little bit more relevant or that's going to make you look at like a more well-rounded applicant. But I don't think there's anything against saying things about outside activities. If you think it's going to improve your application, then you should put it. But for sure, focusing on things that are going to strengthen the broader impacts part of your personal statement, I think is one really good way to incorporate outside non-research activities.
I would say also if it's something really unique that'll make you just stand out and stick in their memory, it's worth including if you can spin it in some way. Like I mentioned doing balloons earlier, and a few of my reviewers mentioned balloons in their review because people just read it and get excited and it sticks with them. Now, if it's something that a lot of people do, yeah, maybe save that space for something else. But I would say really assess everything that contributes to who you are as a person and see if you can spin it to make you a better scientist.
Okay, thank you, Julia, and Julia and Morgan, both of you for, how do we kind of, talk about the things we do outside of, research and all that. Now, so now kind of thinking about the application, like the writing and all of it. So should we, let's say, cite specific professors that we could do a research under, but, maybe haven't reached out to? Should we cite reviews or anything like that? Is that okay? And so can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
So I think you can cite whatever you want. There's maybe not very much room in your research proposal, so you should choose out, pick out your citation very carefully. So I think like citing a review would be totally appropriate. Yeah, like think of it like as, you're writing a real proposal. So you just cite the relevant research in the field.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, so as someone who applied as a senior, you don't know where you're going to go. I definitely didn't know where I was going to go when I wrote it, but I thought to myself, I think they like to see confidence. So I said, I'm going to go to this school and work with this professor. And I mentioned the one who I wrote the proposal with because that made the most sense. In reality, I was applying to 7 other schools, so who knew where I was going to end up. But I think it worked out well for me, although not to say it can't work out well if you don't do that. I would say reach out to the professor first, but at least in chemistry, they're very welcoming. That don't stress yourself out about it. Just send an email and say you're interested.
Yeah, I think I was on a different side of the spectrum. I didn't cite any professors that I wanted to do my proposal with because I was just very unsure whether or not like I would end up somewhere. But when it comes to like actually like citing professors' work, like in your little citation section at the end of your research statement, you can use that as an opportunity to cite the work of prominent professors or professors who are very relevant in the field and do work that would be important for contextualizing your research project. It shows that you have an awareness of the field around you and what people consider to be important for the type of work that you would be wanting to do. And so this goes for any type of application. Don't just name drop because you think it would sound cool or make you like somewhat like higher register. But have a purpose for putting someone's name on your proposal. And that purpose could, usually is to show that you are thinking about your science and that these people are really important for you in demonstrating or showing your science.
All right, to echo one thing that Mark said, yeah, I also would recommend when you're citing people for your proposal, try to cite big names that are in that area, particularly people who have labs in the US, because you don't know who your reviewers are going to be. And if you cite them and they're your reviewer, like, good for you. So it can just be a helpful thing to keep in mind that might help you out in the end.
I think the reviewers are really looking to see that you're up on the literature in your field. And that's really important, that you're citing current work and relevant work, as Mark said.
Okay, awesome to hear all that, advice on how do you cite things, when going through the application. And so now as we enter the last 10 minutes of this webinar, I'm gonna, as we know, Giselle is a very special guest to have on our webinar as a former program director of the NSF. And a lot of you have asked, some, specific questions towards her. And, I'd like to call this the lightning round. And so let's go. And so our first question is, does it really matter where you put in your application as your proposed graduate school or institution?
Okay, well, as I said, I left last year, but you tell us where you propose to go. We at that point never share that information with the reviewers. So that information is not part of the application that they see.
Thank you. Our next question is what order is our application going to be read in?
What order within the application?
Yep.
I think that depends, but typically a lot of time is spent on the 2 statements, which are 5 pages total. The rest is supportive material, but the reference letters are really, really important. And so if you think about it, you have 5 pages and your reference writers have 6, because they could each write 2 pages. So you definitely want them to have your application, have your materials, and to really know you. One of the questions, well, we didn't really talk about reference letters, but one of the questions that we were always asked is it okay to have a reference writer who's not in science? Someone I worked with greatly. And typically what we say is, yes, if they can address your leadership skills, your creativity, innovation, your resilience, your problem solving is really important. But you can have one, but usually not more than one. Have the other 2 be academic reference writers. But I think that's something that's lost on a lot of applicants sometimes, is that their reference writers have more space than they do. So use them wisely to communicate extra information. And like Morgan said, or I think it was Morgan said, if there's some unusual circumstance that needs to be explained, they do have a little more space to explain it.
Okay, thank you, Giselle. And our next question is, so if you're taking a gap year after undergrad, with all these different levels of the NSF, who are you going to be compared against if you take a gap year?
Okay, that's a great question. So if you're in a gap year, you're a level 1. You have completed no graduate study. And in fact, if you're not in school, you technically can apply every single year you're not in school. So, so a gap year is considered level 1 undergrad.
Okay. And so how many, should we try to get more than 3 letters of recommendations when applying for the NSF?
Okay, so, and am I supposed to answer all these, or?
I think these are questions specifically directed towards
Okay,
you.
all right, okay. So each application will only have 3 letters in it. However, due to some, I can't tell you how many reference writers' parents die on the night before the deadline, but you would not believe how many people say, I messed up, I did not submit in time, and now my student only has, 2 letters. A few years ago, we went ahead and said you could submit with 2. And so that sort of opens things up a little bit, but it's so be in the order in which they know you and can address your potential to succeed in science. And I would definitely tell your reference writers to address intellectual merit and broader impacts in their letters as well. And you can give them what you think those are, give them your application so they can write a very informed letter.
Another tactic is to give your reference writers the wrong date, like 3 days before the actual deadline.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's pretty funny to hear. Yeah. Okay, and so what are like your thoughts on the new emphasis on computing and AI, and how will that affect, let's say, applications that don't really relate to these areas?
Well, these are developments that happened after I left. Traditionally, GRP has never emphasized one field of study over another. So the statement that they put out saying all fields are welcome, I think my advice would be you need to write what you really do want to do so your passion comes through. Don't try to write a quantitatively intensive research proposal if that's really not what you're interested in. I know that on October 2nd, there's going to be 2 official NSF webinars for GRP. They're listed on the NSF-GRFP.org website. And I think that would be a great question to ask the NSF program directors. So I can't address that. I don't know how that will be handled.
Good, thank you, Giselle, for really telling us about these future NSF webinars and your thoughts on this emphasis on new topics. And as our final question, can you maybe tell us a little bit about what are your highlights of your time at the NSF? And out of the probably hundreds and thousands of applications you saw, what's the best you saw? It's also the worst you saw.
Well, I just think it's so exciting to help science throughout the US through people. And when I was a professor, yes, for 20 years, I taught all my students, but my impact was small. And then going to work for the NSF was amazing because you really got to influence, help people, actually really help people. And if you had an idea on how to do outreach, you could do it. It's just amazing. I started a veterans initiative. So veterans are now a focus of GRFP, and that was just something that I came up with, and we talked about it, and we were able to implement it. So I think the big thing is when you graduate or think about things you want to do later, consider working for a federal agency because it's actually a fantastic job. And there are AAAS science and technology fellowships where you can come and work with program managers at a whole series of different agencies and sort of learn about the whole policy end of things. It's really a nice way to round out your science, to do something a little bit different and more service oriented, honestly. So yeah, I think, I left a full professorship, tenured professorship, and said goodbye to academia. And I'm glad I did, but it was mostly because it was so much more fun to help thousands of people rather than 20 to 30.
Definitely. That sounds honestly what an experience to work at the NSF and all that. And so finally, with the hour coming up, with all of our wonderful speakers, I want to thank them all for really taking the time to talk to you all in the community about NSF-GRFP and all your experiences. And I also want to thank all of you for tuning in and spending this 1 hour with all our speakers. And so, as several of our speakers have mentioned, it doesn't end here. With the Goldwater Scholar Community Slack, do check out the NSF-GRFP and the graduate school channels. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our speakers. And if with questions that maybe we didn't get to. And with that, thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.